Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Games and Thoughts. I'm Michael.
And I am Traxton.
And today we are going to be talking about the subject of prejudice, just kind of the history of it, and maybe where it kind of comes from, and some different aspects of it. So, I guess the first thing that we can talk about or ask is, why do you think that there is prejudice in the human world, I guess?
Well, I think a lot of it obviously comes from historical roots. Like, if we're talking about America specifically, slavery obviously had a huge impact on how we view different races. But I think just a general fear of the other is kind of the root of it. Like, someone looks different than you, so you might think they're different.
And we kind of touched on that on our rural versus urban episode.
Right. Go check that out, everybody.
But yeah, it basically just stems from the misunderstanding of other cultures, and when you have misunderstanding like that, there is questionable information that gets spread around and kind of becomes accepted.
It is odd too, though, that we take it's usually the most superficial differences between us that drives such prejudice. Like, instead of like real differences among people, we bicker over the more meaningless ones.
Mm-hmm. And even like in history, like you said that racism is partly, or not racism, I have to keep it general and say prejudice, is partly due to like slavery, and yeah, that is true, but like, why did people back then think it was okay to enslave people?
Well, and it wasn't even only along racial lines. Like, people were enslaving their own race in other regions of the world. It's like there's prejudice among race, among class. Really, anything that can be used to divide people is.
Yeah, in like ancient Rome and stuff, there was slavery, and they weren't even different races. Although those slaves weren't treated with such terrible conditions as American slaves, but that's a different conversation. So, do you believe that racism is more prevalent in America?
I think the conversation of racism is much more prevalent in America. I'm not sure if we actually have a higher percentage of racists, but I think just the way, like, there's a constant media flow of racial tension that I'm not sure exists in other regions. And I'm not sure if that's actually representative of the reality or not.
It's in the media a lot, but do you think that like it actually is a problem at all?
Oh yeah, it's definitely a problem.
Well, I mean, like, as big of a one that media or like the internet kind of makes it out to be, with all that like SJW nonsense.
Right. Well, I think there's overreaction on both sides. Yeah, again, it's hard to say how much is unique to America, but we certainly act as if it is unique to America.
I tend to think that it's a little more prevalent in America. I obviously don't know because I haven't actually been outside the country, but like, slavery was abolished like 60 years after Britain or something like that. So that's like a few generations worth.
Well, I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, like, when they talk about, slavery's done, there's no systemic racism. It's like, this wasn't that long ago.
Yeah. And then and even then, like, Martin Luther King and the whole civil rights movement was only like 50 or 60 years ago.
Like, that's not even 2 generations.
Yeah, there's a lot of elders that are alive today that are like, like they say the N-word regularly, and
So, yeah, and you brought up the whole SJW phenomenon, which is super internet famous, obviously. I guess, do you think that is more extreme than the actual racism that exists? Like, obviously they're ridiculous most of the time, but do you think the overreaction is more prevalent than the actual racism?
I think they're kind of equally bad. I used to believe that there was only negative prejudice in the form of like racism and stuff, but the more that those SJW type people kind of talk about how they're offended for other people and they're just kind of I'm trying to think of words that aren't offensive, but yeah, basically putting people up on a pedestal and treating them that way is, I would say, about the same as putting them below you. And I think that to be unbiased in our judgment of other people, we have to just kind of keep them on the same level and not like, oh, you're this race, so I think less of you. Or, oh, you're this race, your race has had trouble in the past, so I'm going to think very highly of you.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting, that whole phenomena of being offended for someone else. And I think you make a good case that that's actually can be a form of prejudice. Like, that this person needs to be taken care of because of their racial history.
Yeah, I think of it, I call it, for lack of a better term, good prejudice, where, like, it's not insulting, but it's too nice to the point that, like, it's kind of disturbing.
Yeah, it's almost like a sheltering parent, almost like protecting them from the outside racist world. Like for example, I saw some high school girl like wore a Chinese dress to prom, and everyone freaked out and you can't do that.
Yeah, there was that nonsense.
Yeah, but it's like, how many Chinese people were actually offended by that? Probably not very many.
Yeah, there's just stuff like that going on all the time, and the internet just kind of freaks out about it.
Well, and the worst part about it is that there are real things to be concerned about, and they kind of make a mockery of the whole thing.
I read somewhere that Morgan Freeman has like a really interesting take on the subject of racism, and he believes that in order to do away with racism, we have to stop acknowledging it as a thing and just kind of like see each other as people instead of acknowledging that we're different races. And I kind of agree with that.
Right, yeah. I do think that's the only viable end game, is to just, like, we can't keep evaluating like this good prejudice phenomena that when you do that, you're still evaluating based on race, and all that's going to do is keep racism around longer.
I guess we should keep in mind like history and the fact that slavery was a thing, and we should talk about how wrong it was, but we shouldn't reward people.
And yeah, like, even like you said, just the acknowledgement that race has something to do with your personhood, I think, is wrong and can only lead to bad results. And that's not to say that there wasn't like a time for race-based movements. Like, obviously the civil rights movement was very important, but I just don't think we're not living in the same world right now.
We're starting to go too far. Or I guess some people are starting to take it too far. Like,
yeah, well, that's what's hard about that too. Is it's hard to tell how big the SJW movement actually is. Like, people are making careers off from just bashing the SJWs, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure how big a movement it actually is. Like, you can find any crazy person saying something on Twitter.
it would be interesting to see how many actual, like, full-on SJW people there are.
Well, it's definitely happened. I mean, there's been like the famous college incidents where they're shutting down speakers and all that. So it's not like it doesn't exist, but I think to talk about it too much is a waste of time. There's much bigger issues.
So, with that, is there any closing thoughts? you wanna add?
No, I mean, yeah, think that's a good little overview of it.
Keep history in mind, but don't go crazy about it.
Right on.
Okay, that's it for this episode. We will see you next time. Be sure to check the links and social media stuff in the description, and we will see you on the next episode.